The subject this morning, prayer that God answers. I think it is not a question as to whether God answers prayer or not. I think we will all agree that the question is, do we attain the presence of God that He hears our prayer? Do we or are we able to know that we are in God's presence? For I'm sure if we know that, realizing what He has created and the great things He has done and is doing silently, without any commotion, but with that tremendous power of His consciousness and energy, we know that He will supply us with all our needs. We see how the sun is available, not today of course, how the sun is available to all who will take themselves out into it, and other things of nature, the rain. God supplies all things, so He will supply all our needs. And He will answer prayer if we are sure that we are in His presence. That's the key to this question this morning, prayer that God answers. And so, the question is, how can we get into the presence of God, that He hear our prayer? Attaining His presence, the greatest prayer we can offer is, not for this, not for that, but one prayer. Reveal Thyself, O Father. Reveal Thyself. In the early days of the Master, being full of energy, I used to be hunting for visions and those things, you know, and traveling in the astral, which I hear so many say. Not that I expected I could do it, but still I was interested in those things, and he said, why don't you pray? Why don't you pray that God reveal Himself? And then having Him, you'll have all those things. And so that's what I have been doing ever since. Because that's the most sensible prayer, isn't it? But the thing is, we must get into the presence of God. Realize that. Remember that one thing, or this one thing this morning. If you can be sure you're in the presence of God, then you can rest assured that He, being your own self, your own consciousness, your own thoughts, your own emotions, your own powers, your mind, the intellect, sensation, being all things, you know that if you're in His presence and you know He hears you, then there'll be no question about whether He'll take care of you or not. If there are any special prayers you need, special things, that's perfectly all right. But the thing is, pray, Father, if it is right for me to have this thing, I want it. If it isn't, I don't want it. Because my first thing in life, the most important thing for me is to please Thee. If I can please Thee, Father, because my Master has told me that. He said one time, I used to work to please others. I used to work to be well thought of others and to please them. Now, He says, I work for one thing, to please God. If the Master found that out, we should follow Him, and we will find it out likewise. And so, in the autobiography of a yogi, we read these wonderful words which will illustrate just the points I have just brought out. The Lord responds to all and works for all. The Lord responds to all and works for all. He fulfills any sincere desire of the devotee. Seldom do men realize how often God heeds their prayers. He is not partial to a few. Thank God for that. He is not partial to anybody. but listens to everyone that approaches him trustfully. That's why I said this morning as we meditated, look at the spiritual eye. How? With loving attention. Or, as masters put it, trustingly, trustfully. His children should ever have implicit faith in the loving kindness of their omnipresent Father. If he knows the sparrows fall, he surely knows what we need. And in his presence you will find that you know he knows the sparrows fall. And you will know that he knows what you need. The thing is, we do not get into the presence of God. That's the trouble. We have the ways and the means. But we must make the presence of God within us dynamic to our consciousness. Then we will know that he knows the least little happening in his whole great big body of this universe. And he surely knows what we need and will give us those things. Bible reference at this time, 94th Psalm. He that planteth the ear, shall he not hear? And he that formed the eye, shall he not see? And he that teacheth man knowledge, shall not he know? You can see where the trouble lies as we ask the question, prayer that God answers. The trouble first is we're not in his presence enough to know he knows all these things. Realize that. Then your religion is not a theoretical religion, but a dynamic religion, because you remove the separation between you and your Father. You can say, as Lord Shankar said, I am He, blessed Spirit, I am He. And if you see the presence of God within you and hear his great cosmic sound and feel the touch of his love, then you're not being untruthful, you're stating a truth. Now, not all prayers are equally effective. Not all prayers are equally effective. You've seen that. I'm sure as you've observed in this life, some people pray and they get nothing. Others do not seem to pray at all and they're taken care of. The point is this, in the lives of those who love God, that's the key. A great percentage of their prayers are answered. Those who really love God. Why? Because you cannot really love God without being in his presence. If you really feel in your heart the nearness of God, you really feel him walking with you in everything you do, and you really love him, then you're in his presence. And you know he hears you. And you know he will answer you according to his will and in the way that's best for you, best for your highest good. And so, those who love God are of God. Understand that now. In other words, love is God. And those who love God are of God. And surely they are in his presence. You cannot circumscribe this logic which I have given to you. If you love God, you are of God. I will read you a reference a little later. And if you are of God, are you not in his presence? Understand that. The truths of God are simple, yet so difficult for the blinded to find. Blinded by outward consciousness, worldly consciousness. That's why God speaks to children, not to the worldly wise, but to babes, those who are pure in heart and who are really humble and realize that they themselves are nothing. Nothing. This idea, this ego consciousness that we have is nothing. Where is it at night even? Or where is it if someone hits you on the head? Or where is it if you take an anesthetic? It's nothing. But the reality behind that, the Spirit, is the real thing. That is what we must know. Being in the presence of the great Spirit of God, by being one with His great love, then we know that prayer God answers. The prayer that you want Him and really love Him, God answers by giving you His love. But He will only give it when He is sure that you really want Him. And those who love God are of God. I've did notice with the Master, many years I was with him, that his silent request, always met with prompt approval. And you will find yourself, it wouldn't be fair to set an example here amongst us which we could not emulate, follow, and be like that example. You'll find yourselves, as you love God more and get into His presence, your silent wishes even of your heart are answered. Just like I quoted about the Master. One little incident comes to my mind, how God answers even the slightest wish of the devotee. Master used to take us to the theater sometimes, especially the ladies, he said, because they seemed to need it. The movies, you know. And I used to get taken along. Parts of it I liked, other parts I didn't care much for. But this is the point. Usually we'd come in and it always seemed to be crowded at first. There might be 2 seats and sometimes 3 seats vacant. Well, he took the middle seat, and then if there were 2 seats, I got in, see? Then if there was a third, Mrs. Lewis got on the other side. And then you'd be surprised. You'd watch one by one, people surrounding those 3 seats would get up. And finally, before he was through, he'd have all his little group of devotees right around him. These are facts. This happened not once, many times. And one time, one fellow wouldn't move. Everybody was there except this one on the side. Suddenly he got up and stomped out. Master said I had a tough time willing him out of there. That wasn't exactly the answered prayer, I suppose you could call it. But the other times it was God answers the silent wish of the true devotee. And so realize that you will find yourselves, and I know those of you who are here, who are following sincerely, I know that you find that your silent desire of your heart, God takes care of it. Does He not? I know many of you feel that. So these are great truths. Now, most people do not understand the spiritual laws that govern prayer. There are definite spiritual laws. I've given you 1 or 2. I've given you the key point is to get into the presence of God. Most people do not understand that. They pray, they know that they need something. They know they need something. But they do not realize that to have their prayer answered, it takes conforming to certain laws. And the first thing is to get into the presence of God. Now, material scientists know about this creation. They know about the laws of creation. And you know they know about the force in the atom and all those things. Why? Because they know the science of physics. And so with prayer, there is a definite spiritual, subtle law which governs prayer and the inner consciousness of man. There are certain definite spiritual laws on the spiritual plane of consciousness. Those we must know. Knowing those, our prayers will be answered because we fulfill those spiritual laws. Now those laws are known how? Through the science of yoga. Just as The physical laws are known through physical sciences. So, spiritual laws are known through the science of yoga. Yoga means union. Union with the presence of God within you. That's all it takes. But you have to realize these definite spiritual laws. Unless we know these laws, what happens? Well, our restless, uncontrolled thoughts keep us away from the quiet, I'll say, presence of God within. We cannot utilize His presence within us, His great love, due to the restlessness of our uncontrolled thought processes. That's why Master said the lake of the mind must be calm, must be still. Still the lake of your mind. Know that your mind is made up of ideas, and it is not real. The reality is the creative force that made the mind, made the intellect, made sensation. Know that. Then you will understand the spiritual laws that govern prayer. Master has written in the autobiography beautifully about the control of these restless thoughts. And when those are controlled, what happens? Then you receive the guidance of the intuition of God's presence within you. That is never wrong. But the mind, I have found, is always wrong. But God's presence within is never wrong. And so the Master has written these words. Yoga is a method for restraining the natural turbulence of thought, which otherwise impartially prevents all men of all lands from glimpsing their true nature of spirit. Like the healing light of the sun, yoga is beneficial equally for men of the East and men of the West. The thoughts of most men are restless. A manifest need exists for yoga, the science of mind control. That mind is the thing. Many disciples come and they say, oh, if I could just control my mind. And I say, you don't have to tell me, I know all about it. Anybody that has followed truly self-realization for many years, you will know what the battle is with that mind. You can't trust it. Not in the least. Don't trust it. Don't be fooled. Keep your consciousness on the intuition within of God's presence. Then you will know. And so, as I have said, there are definite laws pertaining to prayer. They are concentration, will, faith, and love. There you have them. Concentration. How can you expect to get in the presence of God? Or how can you expect Him to listen to you when you can't control yourself enough to be in His presence? It's impossible. Concentration, will, faith, and love. Love is the greatest. Concentration, as you know, just a word or two about each. Concentration means that we gather our diffused or scattered attention, and then we place it on one thing. And by doing that, we have the power of God's consciousness within us as life force. Two things. Gather together your scattered life force, known as attention, and focus it on one thing. That's the process of concentration. Now, in self-realization fellowship, yoga, we have the highest technique of concentration. There's none better, known to many of you as the Hong Saw technique, whereby you do just that thing. You concentrate on one thing. And by so doing, you gather the life force from the various processes going on in the body, breathing and so forth, heartbeat and other things. And what do? You gather it together and focus it on one thing, and thereby you develop your concentration. That's the first law. Now, developing that concentration, having the power of God within you, as the life force in your hand, so to speak, then what do? Then you place that life force, in which is your consciousness also, through another technique of self-realization fellowship, known as the highest technique of meditation, the Om technique, you place it on the presence of God within you. You place your consciousness on the holy vibration, the Holy Ghost, the Word. In the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God. So don't you see, if you place your concentration on the presence of God in a tangible way, as the holy vibration, with its light and sound, and above all, the feeling in your heart, the natural love in your heart, if you place your concentration, your attention on that, and you are nothing but consciousness, don't you see you're in the presence of God? Because the first manifestation of God is what? The Holy Ghost, the great light from which all things have come. And so, when you can do that, know without doubt that you are in the presence of God. That's His first manifestation of His unmoving consciousness. There's no manifestation unless consciousness moves. And the first movement is the Holy Ghost, the holy vibration, the great Word. And in that Word is God's great intelligence, His love. So that's the first thing. Concentration is very important because it will give you the ability to know the presence of God. At least you will begin the path of making the presence of God dynamic to your consciousness. And that leads us to the next one. And the next spiritual law of prayer is will. Will. It takes, Master has said, it takes the greatest application of will to know God. It takes the greatest application of will to know God because to know God is the science of all sciences. I remember when I was coming out here from Massachusetts, and I was thinking it was a big job to leave the practice and gather up all the loose ends and come out here, and the Master told me, he says, coming to California is not half as big a job as knowing God. And I found out that was so. Because knowing God is the greatest of all sciences. It takes will. It takes a great amount of will. The Master says boundless determination. Boundless determination is necessary to draw God's attention. That's why our prayers are not answered. Because we do not poke Him hard enough. We do not rouse Him. God, I think, likes to be poked. I think He waits until you're so fed up you give Him a good one and He says, come on, I'll listen to you. It takes a great amount of will. We have within us various kinds of will. Just to give you an idea, perhaps you are not using the right kind. The first is blind will, explosive will of youth. You know how they go, and that's about the end of it. But when you change that explosive will, that blind will, to thinking will, then you can accomplish very much. Men of business use that thinking will. But when in the presence of God you unite your will with His wisdom-guided will, then it becomes dynamic will or divine will. And so it is necessary to utilize the greatest amount of will to know the presence of God in a dynamic way. In meditation, for instance, you know yourselves, all of you who meditate faithfully, that you see an aspect of God's great presence within you, as the light perhaps at this point, or you hear the cosmic sound, or you feel in your heart, and you feel, there I have it. And the next minute it's gone. Why? Because your will was not dynamic enough. If you can keep your will on that aspect of God, whatever one it is that you make dynamic to your consciousness, if you can keep that, you keep your will and keep on that, so to speak, or one with it, you have the presence of God with you. It's a difficult job. It's the greatest task. It's the ultimate end of meditation. Meditation is not just sitting and thinking. No. Meditation is doing just what I have said. To exercise the greatest amount of will to keep in contact, so to speak, with God. And as it says in the Gita, most wonderfully, and this is what it means, he who never loses sight of me, I never lose sight of him. And if you want your prayers answered, Get a hold of God, so to speak, within you. Never lose sight of it. Never let go. How can God let you go? If His life is your life, and you keep in contact with that life through the teachings of self-realization, you have God with you. How can He let you go? He can't, because He is your own consciousness and life, and all of your functions are His doing. So realize that will is a very necessary law. And then we come to faith. Faith is very important, because don't think you're going to immediately, by the exercise of will, be able to hold God. You cannot do it. Therefore, faith is very necessary. Faith bridges, so to speak, the time when you contact God until you make Him your own. Faith is necessary. Now, faith, the Sanskrit word for faith, you can remember it this way. The Sanskrit word for faith means without breath. Isn't that a strange thing? You know, in your breathless state, just take, for instance, Friday night. I notice it many times, there's no breath. Why? Because you're in the presence of God. You're in His presence. And when you're in His presence, there is no breath. Now, if you're in the presence of God, that's why you have faith. You know. You know those things not seen. Not seen by outward senses, mind, and intellect. Not understood by them. But through faith in that silence within, when the breath has ceased, then the intuition of the soul is with you, and you know. And so faith, just if you have that experience once in a while, it gives you great faith in the times between your contact with God and your realization of your oneness. You do not lose faith because you've had the experience of contacting God, even for a little bit. And so faith, remember, means without breath. And whenever you have that state in your meditations, when the breath has ceased, or slowed down even, do you doubt then that God exists? No, because you're in His presence. Faith is very necessary. Being in His presence, even for a few moments, will enable you to keep faith, until by His grace you are one with Him in a dynamic way. Faith is very necessary. And finally, the greatest law is this, and one more thing about faith. Faith enables you to know that God hears you. That's what I meant to say. Faith enables you to know in that silence within, when you hear the cosmic sound or see the light at this point, or feel the bliss of God, you know God hears you. That's faith. That's what it means in the Bible, the evidence of things not seen. And when you know He hears you, you know eventually He will answer you. These are wonderful truths. And that brings us to the final law, spiritual law of answering prayer, or why God answers certain prayers and why He does not, is the great spiritual law of love. Love. Love is God. God is love. I'll read you the reference in just a moment. God, or love, is a feeling aspect in the holy vibration. Love is a feeling aspect in the Comforter of which Jesus spoke. There are other aspects in the holy vibration, as I have spoken of this morning, the light and the sound. But what good would a light be, what good would a sound be without the feeling aspect of God or the love of God in it? It would be cold. And so, God's love is the greatest force in the universe. That great power of God's love is that which is pulling all things back to Him, the great drawing power of God. That's the greatest force in the universe. And that's why I read a little while ago, God is love. And those who love God are of God. When you love God, you are one with His feeling aspect in the great Comforter. You are of God. You are one with Him. Realize it's the greatest force in the universe. Rulers And armies have lots of power. You know what they have done in the last 2 wars. They are very powerful. Businessmen, leaders of industry, are very powerful, are they not? Look what they do. Coming up this morning, I just looked at the way they make these roads now. That's just a little thing. But business, captains of industry, they're very powerful. Nature and her forces are terrific. What earthquakes, what the ravages of earthquakes you are familiar with, and other things. Nature and her forces are very powerful. Satan and his evil force is tremendously powerful. But God's love is more powerful. Never forget this. God's love is the greatest force in the universe. These other things are extremely powerful, but God's love is more powerful. Never doubt that. Master said, leave all else but never God's side. And that's the reason. Because the love of God is the greatest force in the universe. And if you have that within your breast, you are of God. Don't forget it. There's no separation between you. When God's true love comes to you and you realize it, there's no separation. Nothing exists except that tremendous power of God's love. And that's why in our prayer we say, Heavenly Father, friend, beloved God, may thy love shine forever. Let us say it together. Heavenly Father, friend, beloved God, may thy love shine forever on the sanctuary of my devotion, and may I be able to awaken thy love, O Father, in all hearts. God's love is the greatest force in the universe. Never forget it. In the Bible, 1 John, 4th chapter, 7th and 8th verse, remember them. Beloved, let us love one another. For love is of God. And every one that loveth is born of God and knoweth God. Don't you see how important it is to love God? You'll understand about prayer then. He that loveth not knoweth not God, for God is love. Love is the greatest law. And then also in Matthew, 22nd chapter, 36 to 40th verses. Someone asked Jesus, what is the greatest law? Jesus said unto him, thou shalt love the Lord thy God. Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, and with all thy soul, and with all thy mind. And the second is, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. Now, on these 2 commandments of love hang all the law and the prophets. And so, on these 2 commandments, the law of love, on that rests the law of successful prayer. Realize that. All law is founded on the law of love. And therefore, if you want to have your prayer answered, if you want to know the kind of a prayer that God will answer to you, love Him. Love Him. Love Him. Jesus said, love your enemies. Why? Because it's very difficult to turn your enemies. The more good you do, the worse they hate you. The more good you do, the less they think of you. But there's one force that will move them, and that's God's love. The greatest force in the universe. And that's the prayer which God answers when He feels His great love welling up in the humble devotee's heart. He answers is prayer.